Welcome, one and all, to Enlightened Conversations, where this season we're going just that little bit deeper and not skimming on the judgy surface of life. I will also be sharing conversations with my guides, and you can be guaranteed that all the topics that come through are authentic, life-changing and enlightened, because we want you to live a more joyful, peaceful and loving vibration. Let's go. Hi everyone, it's Michelle Lightworker here, and welcome to episode 5, season 7 of Enlightened Conversations. We have a little bit of a deep dive today in understanding the minds of murdering and terrorism. Yes, two big topics that came to me in different journal entries with my conversations with Ralph after I wrote my book, Conversations with Ralph. So these were separate conversations that I had about 6 months apart back in 2018 and 2019, and I've been asked to share those today on just giving you a little bit of a different reality on what happens inside the minds of and the soul of murderers, and what happens in the collective consciousness that contributes or prevents it, so we can take a little bit more responsibility for creating a more peaceful world, one that doesn't require escalations in behaviour for us to learn. So let's begin. The first journal entry that I wrote was on the 4th of September 2018, and so basically I was shown that when a person murders and they don't remember the actual event because they black out, it's because their emotional reality, which is their astral body, has reached a peak where they leave their body. They disassociate as they're too saturated to realise that another being has entered into their body. They are high on rage, and then another being can penetrate their physical body. When their astral body leaves, then the other being can carry out the murder. The other being may be quite disconnected from their own emotional reality and be sociopathic. They don't feel anything, however, they can get high off the murders or a kick out of it. The host is not present when it happens. The same thing can occur with alcohol. This is notable when people change their personality. Other beings step in and carry out these deeds that the person would never premeditate. However, I'm also being shown that when a person is regularly in the vibration of a lower energy, they can also be impregnated with murderous thoughts. They can be repeatedly delivered, and the host is put in a trance-like state in carrying out the actions that lead towards the murder. Programmed to murder is what I'm hearing. Why? Because the beings that are wanting to commit murder are addicted to it to mood alter and to avoid their own unresolved reality. Not all murder is committed by another being. However, I am being shown that when a blackout or personality change or trance-like behaviour occurs, this can definitely be because the host is under the influence of a lower vibrational being. So that's the first entry, and obviously people can, in the here and now in their own lives, totally be addicted to murder. A lot of the serial killer murders that have occurred are actually sex addicts, and they have escalated into different things that involve murder, like necrophiliac, and which is having sex with dead bodies. And they have also found that their sex addiction hasn't taken them to places they want to be, as high as they want to be, and they start to escalate by developing a killing pattern. And they might already be violent in their sex addiction. That's part of their eroticized rage. So I understand that, and I'm very aware of that because I have worked as a counsellor for sex addiction. I understand that. However, what we're talking about here is also that those people are very vulnerable as well to attracting an entity that will continually want to escalate the behaviour. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the host who's already addicted to the sex addiction or the murdering is not getting high off it. They may well be, and that might be point blank where it ends. However, it also then lends themselves to attract beings that may do that, and they may start to escalate to the point where they don't remember. And that could be drug fueled as well. That can contribute to it. Alcohol fueled as well, depending on how their brain works and their chemistry. So we can understand a little bit better the nature of murder and how it pertains to escalating behaviour and potentially terrorism, because the host may be young and impressionable, have unresolved anger towards society, and that unresolved anger may play itself out in wanting to hurt people, and wanting to hurt can also then attract those entities to a person. And when I say entities, it's actually not necessarily just a demonic evil presence. It could be a person who has crossed over, who isn't quite crossed over, and they have unresolved feelings themselves, and they don't want to face it. Like I mentioned in that journal entry, they don't want to face it. They don't want to face their reality. They don't want to face their unresolved emotions, which do carry on after death. And that's something that they are trying not to face. They want to do something that will help them alleviate that pain. And often, if you can think back to history, and you can think back to how heinous crimes were back in the Middle Ages and even before that, there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of killing. And so, we might have souls that have no desire to evolve from those wounds, and they may be inflicted, and this is all revenge based, or they may be abusers just because they have been on that track for such a long time that's how I would identify them. Not necessarily that they were born abusers originally, but from their history and their treatment, they've evolved into a very extreme abuser. So what we're talking about here is going to be expanded on a little bit in my next entry. The next entry that I made was on about this, towards this terrorism, was made a week after a shooting that occurred in New Zealand back in 2019. I wrote this journal entry on the 23rd of March. So I'll just read this one out, which goes deeper into this topic. So we had a terrorist shooting in New Zealand last week, and this has been the catalyst for a lot of learnings. I have so much that I need to express on this topic alone. It has been a huge awakening for border control overkill, migrant culling, and anti-unity type thinking. The events in New Zealand regarding the terrorist attack were pretty full on, but it helped me to realise that the true terror only exists if we see our lives as finite and believe that they are being snuffed out. Essentially, no one can snuff out our spirit. So I took this topic to Ralph and had a conversation. Now, the response I got from Ralph was, that's true. The true cost of life is the periods of time we allow ourselves to not be resolved, to not be free. No one can take that from us, but we can allow ourselves to be put in that position. We can allow others to do that to us, and we can allow others to speak and think that way without speaking up about the true nature of the infinite spirit of man. And then I responded, I said, I believe the terrorists succeed with their terror when we believe that they have the power to kill a person indefinitely. Otherwise, what are we truly afraid of? I feel that the trending nature of terrorism is a catalyst for the human consciousness to wake up to the facts that we are infinite beings. The voices of those that have been killed physically by terrorist acts still have something to say. But are our judgments louder than our ears can hear? I feel that the antidote to terrorism is coming to terms with our own infinite nature and that of others. That no one can ever really kill us is the antidote. No one has that power. Then we can walk in faith, confidence, and fearlessness. We can also learn more about what needs to happen to bring forth solutions to healing terrorism. So then Ralph responded, that is right. The terrorist is an expression of our own fear, disconnection, and need for ultimate power over life. Because the terrorist feels inferior, disconnected, and out of control in their own world. They don't have a base or foundation of real connection. Their obsession with annihilation is also mirrored in our own obsession of annihilation within humanity that is expressed through guns, war, movies, video games, and novels. We are in some way feeling that to be free is to annihilate. But of course, that is a terrible lie. We cannot annihilate. That is why death row doesn't work. It doesn't kill guilty people. We are only liberating them to express their unresolved personality in ways that are even more accessible to the human race than they were before they were imprisoned. Should we imprison them? Well, if thoughts are realities and we are not dealing with them as real, and they are unresolved, then how does prison actually work? Only resolving or acts to attempt to resolve work. Only understanding contracts and attempts to fulfill contracts to promote learning work. Killers, sociopaths, and other crimes are motivated by contracts signed when they were in a different state of consciousness. Perhaps if there was an education around that, there would be more forgiveness, and also there would be a chance for the killer to start to be a different energetic contributor to society. The question should not be, how can we get rid of them? The question should be, how can we resolve ourselves with their contract and the part they played in it? And how can we help them move on from identifying themselves with that contract to determine who they are? It's ridiculous that a contract should define a person's entire spirit. Is it evil, or is it actually something that one agreed to help wake them up? If so, who's guilty? The one fulfilling the contract, or the one who asked for it in the first place to occur so that they or others could awaken? If the friends, family, and society don't do their own inner work on how they can be resolved with tragic events, then they are the ones disconnected from themselves, and in their own minds, the thoughts they have probably had mirror the heinous act that was delivered at the time. Collective thoughts gather round, and then those of a lower vibration pick them up and carry them out. So, who is really guilty if we want to assign guilt? Who is required to really be brought to justice? And what is justice anyway? Is it to punish? If so, how does this resolve anyone at all? If no one is resolved through the deliverance of punishment, then what is it achieving? Is it keeping the cycle going? These are the kinds of questions that humanity needs to be asking when looking at crime, imprisonment, and punishment. Okay, so that is a lot. And I just said, thank you. This is very enlightening. I have so much to integrate and think about at that time. It's a big help. So that was the end of that conversation. So that really takes us back to the energy of really people evolving and what freedom really means. And if people have lost loved ones with these heinous acts, they can also keep the cycle going because of their thought process being as heinous as in an energetic form as the actual murderer or terrorist, because that's what they're feeding into the society. And then someone else comes along who is vulnerable to those vibrational frequencies, picks them up and on it goes, and it keeps the cycle going. And in relation to like death row, let's go there, because when we talk about people on death row, we're talking about that they have potentially they've been caught doing something that has been really, really severely bad. And so what we're doing is we're saying, well, you deserve to die. And so therefore, if we snuff out the life of someone who's died and they're not resolved with what they did, then they could potentially be free to then attach to other souls here who want to commit those acts, and they can piggyback onto those people and they can potentially escalate that situation for that host, and on it goes and continue to carry on. So as a society, for me, it feels like we have a responsibility to stop it, to stop punishment, and to look at more therapeutic options with more of an open mind. And I'm, obviously coming from a place where I believe in past lives, I believe in soul contracts, I believe in those kind of things that if you just come from the, model that you should an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, like the Old Testament, or if you come from the model of forgive, turn the other cheek, that's fine too. But or just, crucify people, then that's not going to help the actual person resolve. And so therefore, if we don't believe in unity, if we don't believe we're somehow connected to that all people, those people, then that's the disconnection. That's what Ralph was talking about. That's where we disconnect. That's where we unplug. Now, people only kill because they're disconnected. So if we unplug and we feel disconnected and we disconnect from our heart space in relation to trying to figure out why this person did what they did and why is this continuing and how heinous is it and how heinous is it has to get until they change and all those kind of things. But if we realize that the answer is we really don't know sometimes what their journey is, like in the first episode of this series where we say truth exists in context. And if we don't actually understand that and we don't actually feel that in our heart space and realize there's a bigger picture here, and we may never understand this person's journey because it's so unique to them. However, we're all on this evolutionary journey. So we, on some level, need to feel at peace with it in order to feel that we don't disconnect and create more of that energy, that low vibrational energy. Because if we're saying, I wish that person's dead, and well, what are we doing? We're doing the exact same thing that person did. We're acting it out in our thought process. And if we're saying, they don't deserve to live, well, that's exactly what that person who treated that victim was probably thinking. They don't deserve to live. They were probably thinking they're a piece of nothing, So if we go there, we're repeating the cycle. We're feeding that lower vibrational energy. And there's always going to be people in society on this journey that are at that point. And that collective energy, they pick it up and then they go and act it out. And then we wonder how an 18, 21-year-old could go into a church in New Zealand and shoot people at random. And that's how it happens. And so we have to realize our responsibility of how we're contributing, how we're feeding these things. And let's just apply it to world leaders. How often have we seen something on the news about the insanity of what is going on between two countries or more, and thought to ourselves, a really low vibrational thought around that person who's sitting in a powerful position, and then there we are, we're feeding it into the grid. We're feeding it. So it's really it's a heavy topic, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's really simple. It comes back down to what we're choosing to think at any given moment in time. I'm fine with feeling things are crazy and insane and I don't understand it, and admitting that, but I choose to believe that this is part of where humanity needs to be, what it needs to experience for now, and to whatever changes need to happen. So that's where we can be I guess you could say, contributor of something more positive, where we're keeping an open mind, where we're choosing to see the situation in a broader context, and even questioning, like getting curious, not furious. And not necessarily that we will understand the insanity of people's decisions, what they need to do in order to feel powerful. We'll probably never understand that, because it doesn't make sense on some level, but on another level, because it doesn't make sense, if we can find a place of compassion for it and sit there in our energetic vibration and feed that in, then we become disruptors of continuing that cycle going. So I'm going to leave it there, because I think that's really powerful, and I hope this reaches enough people to understand that we can be contributors to peace in other ways that aren't violent, that they are really powerful, that we're feeding that energetic vibration, that nourishment into the grid, rather than the fear, the terror, the powerlessness, the victimhood, the untruth that annihilation is possible, because it's not. We're eternal. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.